trying.
Slide out, take a picture. Slide out, take a picture.
You have a website called maeda.pm, which stands for product management, I believe. And at the top of it, you say, I'm a product manager and data scientist in training. Why? Why are you embarking on that voyage of discovery?
Well, you know, it takes someone to know one. So when Diego noticed it, I was like, you actually read that? Like most people are like, oh, everybody was like, oh, Diego, you noticed that. Well, first of all, I am just aware of how ignorant I am every year. It's like, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. You know, I didn't know that. I remember the reason why I left the MIT role is because so many people said I was a creative person and I couldn't do anything for real. So I got my MBA as a hobby, which doesn't help you or anything like that. But I ran the university because I wanted to run the whole system. And I was lucky to be unlucky because it was when the global financial crisis hit. So I had to actually become a true operator. And that was humbling and interesting and sort of soul-crushing, but also renewing. But then I realized that, okay, that's how like an older institution runs. How does a younger institution run? What's the mechanics of a startup? So being in Kleiner Perkins, I got to look up really up close and see like, oh, this is how it all happens. I'd seen the final result, I'd seen the education part, seen these pieces, but I remember Chris Dixon one time on Twitter, he said something like, that John person, he doesn't really know anything for real. Or like someone else said to me like, oh, he's never been like in-house making anything. I love when people diss me, because I'm like, yeah, you're actually kind of right. So that's why I began working at Automatic, to kind of find a new way, to like go deep, get my fingers dirty. I've always been writing code since I ever started, but now that I'm deep, I'm now ES6 compliant. I can do all the things that I should have known along the way. I'm fully caught up, and it's really great. But the thing that I'm most struck by is how every time I do something, I learn how I didn't know it. For instance, product management, I was ignorant of that 5 years ago. Being at Kleiner Perkins, I began like eating like all kinds of like stuff, like eating like documents. It's like, oh, this is that. Oh, no, I understand. Oh. Data science has always been my passion, but I didn't know it was called anything. So I was like, oh, this is a thing. Okay, so because I see it important in the field of design to understand how all these things intersect only because of information science. Because in the world of industrial design, like the chair we're sitting on, there was a kind of data science. There was a lot of product management, but very little of the kind of stuff that all of you are managing, which is millions of customers at the same time with a live product. That's something different. That's something strange. And so I've been trying to put all the pieces together so I'm less ignorant.
So what have you learned so far about this kind of new type of design, new type of product management?
I've learned how bad universities are.
In what sense?
I've learned how universities as a construct are not relevant in a world where products live in the cloud, because the paradigm is so different. So whatever is taught in design is irrelevant. Whatever's taught in computer science in many cases is irrelevant too. As you know, like many of the companies out here will bring a professor from MIT or whatever to kind of educate them and catch them up, right? So it's a different thing. If you're a history major, perfect place to hang out, because the history doesn't change that much. But if you're in a field where everything is changing, I think universities are extremely irrelevant.
So what's the alternative then?
The alternative is for companies to share learnings faster, But also companies are, companies like this company or any company that I've worked with or I'm in, suffer this problem of working in a very intellectualized medium. So you're very far away from a customer's actual problem. And the problem of education is that it creates confidence and it creates a sense of knowing. And I find that so dangerous. So when I think about product management, I like how it's a way to formulate a problem in a very mechanical way. In the case of data science, I like that it's a way to leverage all the data, but also if you bring in more empathy, you can ascribe stories to it. Let me give an example. So I've been active in different parts of the US, specifically Detroit, Philadelphia, and Appalachia, because by working in parts of the world where people don't have as much technology, like this region, you immediately recognize that the world is not robots driving around campus delivering food. I know you don't believe it, but I know. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? You know, there isn't a world where you like touch a button and someone's going to pick you up and drive you somewhere. There isn't that world, you know. Oh, but it's coming. It's coming. No, it's not coming in a lot of places. And so I remember like working with Hodge Flemings, CEO of a Rebrand Cities project, working to bring websites to all kinds of neighborhoods. Was hanging out with Hodge in a neighborhood in Detroit, and so struck by how if you're a neighborhood that is not digitally privileged, you're kind of invisible. You know, maybe you have a Google Map entry, but it's like dark. You don't know what's there. And so if these sites have some kind of online presence, it doesn't matter which brand or whatever, they become less fearful to you because now you can see from far away, oh, they have a parking lot, and there are human beings there, and they want to make a living, and maybe they aren't as fancy as a WeWork, but they're a coffee shop, and you can probably go there, and it's going to be safe. So building websites for these different people has been transformative. And I find so many people telling me, John, that's so great, you're helping the poor people. To them, I always say, no, they're helping me take care of the fact that I've become so stupid because I don't understand what they really need or want. And in doing so, it changes how I think about products. Not design products yet, think about products, why we serve them, and I find it so useful. And I think product management pushes design to think more like that than design itself.
I've struggled because I was taught you got to go hang out with real people and get empathy for them. And yet we're also living in a world, which you talked about, where we could just put something out there, wire it up, and watch millions of people use it. So I see there's this emerging tension between should you research before or research after, and also it seems like when you throw artificial intelligence into the equation, then should we even be designing a product that's uniform, or should we just let it morph to whatever it needs to be based on what the people are signaling that they need? Like what's happening with all this stuff that we learned in university?
Well, like I said, I don't believe it's relevant anymore. So first of all, I want to add another vitamin that's really important, and just hired an automatic head of design ops, Allison Rand, and she comes from Frog. And if anything that she learned at Frog, it's about interdisciplinary teams. And so I love working with Allison because she's always said, where are the developers? Where are the developers? And she always says this because she's saying that if the people who are actually making this stuff aren't involved in it, then it's just people who are people talking to each other about like what should get made. And that vitamin ED, like engineering development, has been a critical piece of the work that we've been doing to understand how to improve products, because we can think about how to improve them, but how do we execute on that? In terms of the need to, what is the question again?
How do you actually think about data and empathy in a world where data is so easy and
okay.
It's such a big volume to get?
So I think the paradox is like this right now. We're like, It's, do we go with the wisdom of crowds, which is a kind of an AI thesis, or like huge, like large data thesis, or do we go with the wisdom of experts who are making intuitive bets on where to go?
Experts being the people creating the products.
Experts being the people who create the products who have intuitions about how the world should be, versus how the crowds say everything is the way I want it. And I guess the only conclusion I have is that experts need to be informed by data, right? Because it's good to go into the future, because the crowds are working with an average of information. And so you're only going to get what's at t equals, constant 0, which is right now. And if you're trying to grow as a business, you have to go where the puck is heading. So if you sit in here, you'll get mass adoption without a future. If you sit over here, you're going to fail all the time, but once in a while you'll win big. So it's some combination, but most importantly, it's assuring that your wisdom of experts are truly informed. And they can't be truly informed based upon book knowledge or their past. Like, I was at this thing this weekend where there was like one of these like super Silicon Valley types, the super figures, like, oh my gosh, like they invented like, corn that came out of that, whatever, this kind of like super like, and what happens time over time, I see, is that they will say two things that are contradictory. It's important to forget that everyone who's famous in tech was just super lucky. Like they were there when like this, like, what is it, like the Beverly Hillbilly, oil, oh my gosh, there's oil, right, because crude, like, I guess I'll use this, But we kind of romanticized it as some kind of like genius bolt of lightning, whatever. Timing was really good, right? So what I see is that the people who were there, who are now like the kind of Greek gods of this whole thing, the narrative goes in two directions. One direction is, because of Moore's law and the speed of change, everything is moving so fast that you can't believe anything you hear, because anything from the past is incorrect, because it's changed. On the other hand, listen to me, because I made it all happen. Do you see this weird thing? Don't believe anyone because times are changing, but believe me. But I'm like, why should I believe you? Right? So this is this thing that I'm kind of like stuck in. Do you feel this? I'm like, so I don't believe any like blah blah person. Like, I don't believe myself either. So
how does trust fit into this from simplicity? I want to believe it.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe though, because everything's kind of automated for me. I'm not actually doing much myself.
Oh, apropos this thing, what was it? I was talking to an insurance CEO person, and we were having this conversation about chatbots for customer support.
You like chatbots.
Right, it's like, yeah, I was like, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Like, how are you doing? I'm doing great. I'm like, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Like, oh, you're doing great all the time. You're amazing. Like, oh, I know you're amazing. So this idea of a chatbot and insurance thing we're talking about, and he was saying something about how important it is for when a customer has had an accident, that they have someone human to talk to immediately. I crashed my car. I want to talk to a person. I don't want to talk to a chatbot. My son is ill. He's in the hospital. I want to talk to a person. I don't want to talk to a chatbot. And he said the number one reason why is not for information, because the customer needs someone to listen to them. I thought this was like super profound, because remember when like Google, like the recent I.O., like, Sundar's on stage, like, this amazing thing has happened. We have a chatbot that's gonna fake the yeah, yeah, oh, like this, like, chat, right? Did people like that? No, they didn't. Because they knew it was fake listening. Who likes friends that fake listening to you? You don't like them, right? I don't like a fake. You know who they are. Like, oh, you're not really listening to me. You're like fake listening to me. Like, right? So I thought that was interesting because trust means we're investing the same amount of time together, and we're losing that natural resource together. And that's what trust is about. And a chatbot has unlimited time. And once you become aware of that, you know that it's asymmetric.
So when your time's infinite because you're a bot, it's not very valuable. So your empathy is kind of worthless. It's fake.
It is what's interesting is that it's truly worthless. Yeah. You know, once someone figures that out. See, the problem I think right now is that the general population doesn't understand computation. So there might be some belief that computation is finite. It's a natural resource that's being depleted. And so I guess I'm talking to a chatbot that's fake, but it's kind of like the same as me. But once you break through the physics and understanding of the gravity laws of computation, you're like, oh, wait a second, you have infinite power, and you're not like me. When that happens to more people, this facade is not sustainable. So
we've gotten to a pretty heavy place right now, so I'm going to change up the tempo just a little bit. That's very profound, actually. I think computational power is infinite until the sun swallows the earth.
Design is a terrible word because it means too many things. So that's why I've been calling it 3 kinds of design: classical design, design thinking, and computational design. Good design and bad design differ when you don't understand who you're serving. The old design was great because all you had to serve was rich people. So you had to go to good parties. But the new design is serving a lot of people, and that's making bad design very easy to happen now. I think the fundamental skills are to reject the idea of design in the past and appreciate product management, data science, all kind of think computer science, things that are outside the realm of classical design. No, because our customers were from Boeing, they were like engineers, Aeroastro, or restaurant owners, gardeners. We didn't have any dentists, so I wanted to be a dentist for a while because one of our customers was a dentist and he was always like, seemed kind of like wealthy. My mom liked the dentist. Yeah. But no designers. Didn't know what that was. John W. Gardner. Who has read John W. Gardner stuff? Oh my gosh, what a good opportunity. Yeah, so if you are like depressed or like beaten down at work, not saying it ever happens here. So happy you have robots delivering your food here, so you're all okay. But let's say you get beat down and whatever, like, oh, I can't take it, can't get up. Just type in, search, John Gardner personal renewal. And there's an essay on pbs.org site that is not very long, and you can sit there. I suggest you read it whole, and I read it like once every 2 weeks, maybe. Depends upon how bad things are, and it kind of like really kind of recenters me because it reminds you that the act of trying to achieve change is not unusual. It's not unusual to try to seek change to occur. It's not unusual. And for those who seek to do it, you will suffer, but you'll recover because that's what a change agent does. And so that's why it always helps me, like, oh, this is very normal. Like, oh, this is a good perspective. Like, for instance, one of my favorite pieces of that piece, and there's books by him too. There's a book called Self Renewal, which is lovely.
I have that on my bedstand.
I mean, like I just leave it right where I can always get to. It's like good medicine. He says that at some point in life you realize that people are neither for you or against you. They're just thinking about themselves. And it's a wonderful piece of like knowledge, because once you realize it, you're like, oh, I'm not saying it like in a bad way. This is a law of physics. And once you accept it, you're like, it's much easier to seek change. Just yesterday, Inside Automatic, I posted something about Who knows the $6 Million Man? $6 Million Man is a TV show, okay.
It's like acid vodka. Yeah.
So before mentioning the $6 Million Man, I asked myself who internationally knows that. Because I realized, like maybe if you're in the US or like Americas, you might have heard of that, you know, and so I realized, let me stop for a moment. So I looked it up and I found references of $6 Million Man in Spanish. He's called the El Hombre Nuclear. So I was like, interesting.
The nuclear man, for those
Yeah.
who don't speak Spanish.
So I posted about the El Hombre Nuclear. And everyone's like, oh, you got it wrong, John. That's a $6 Million Man. And I'm like, of course I know that. But it's an example of how I'm trying to always question my own pieces of authority and broaden it. So in the case of the internationalism, you know, a big problem of design was the international style. It was a belief that everything modernized is going to be the best, most legible scenario.
It's kind of like Mies van der Rohe.
Right. It was this kind of arrogance, which is very common to how design operates. Because design is a soft discipline, therefore arrogance was really important because someone had to firmly say, this is the way. Like I remember when I was at Paul Rand's studio finishing his last book, one of the pages of it, and I thought, the rag, you know the rag? It's like the right margin. It was kind of bad. So I was like, excuse me, this rag doesn't look right. He looked at me sternly and said, if I say the rag is right, the rag is right. I was like...
He famously would only bring one solution to his clients. He didn't give them like a whole book of them.
I was like, it's your book? Okay. But that thing doesn't work universally. So I would encourage different markets to consider different aesthetics. But it's hard because, like, let me give an example. So I don't know if this is okay to say this, but you know how there's like all these like web accessibility standards for color? Who knows about this? Raise your hand.
Yeah, we have those.
Yeah.
Of course.
I find these really interesting because number one, there's no guarantee of the gamma of color on every device, right? But people will sit and argue about like it's 0.141 off, you know, if you just like change the color by 0.14, it's going to meet WAG guidelines of AA, AAA. And I'm like, have you ever seen like an OLED screen? I think it's really different, number one. Number two, if you're a developer, what is your favorite thing to do with the color? You want to assign it to a variable, right? $sign something equals this color, right? Now let's say you really look at the AA, AAA standard much more carefully. You ask yourself, if you choose a color, highlight color, you know, white text is good on that highlight color, and you use that highlight color somewhere else on the screen as a line, you've now broken the accessibility standards because now that is the color of text on a white background. Are you following me? The developer's like, but wait, you're saying I have to have two variables to describe that highlight color? $sign highlight color normal, $sign highlight color special? What are we going to do with that? We stuff into a component, we're going to lose whatever, there's no convention for that, I got to add an extra boolean, right? And so like, if it's that small, what if you're saying like, well, in this market, like for my mother, she wants butterflies and frogs. From a developer's perspective, that's like a nightmare. So I think somewhere along the line, it requires this kind of empathy, understanding, grassroots, sort of feeling stuff. And that's why Alison Rand, my colleague, when she keeps saying like, where are the developers? Where are the developers? And I love developers because I am a developer, number one. And number two, there's all kinds of developers. There are some developers that are amazing typographers, amazing colorists, amazing architects. And so finding those people, I think, is really important in tech companies today. They're champions of design. And also finding those who hate this stuff too, because their opinion is valid too. because they're trying to optimize, make more efficient, reduce technical debt. This kind of factor is key for design too.
Back to multidisciplinary.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing I learned about interdisciplinarity, is for a long time people would come to me and say, John, can you help us design an interdisciplinary program? And I would say no, because once you design an interdisciplinary program, it becomes a discipline, right? It's like, I think a mango smoothie is awesome, and like, oh my gosh, everything becomes a mango smoothie, and it's just as bad as like a vanilla smoothie. Design thinking is not overrated. I find that a lot of designers will diss design. It's kind of popular for classical designers to diss design thinking because it's those post-it note toting whiteboard people who they better not write their Sharpie marker on the whiteboard or they get, that's #1 problem with a design thinker, which marker, right? And it's not designed because they're not really designers, blah, blah, blah. To all of them I say, great, just don't forget that they make 5 times as much as you in salary. That's where I stand.
All right. He has an MBA, so change the way you think about stuff.
I think it was like 10 years ago, I bought the domain creativeleadership.com. And I thought, like, what a strange investment. But now, years later, I think I see so many people who describe themselves as creative leaders. So it's kind of rewarding. Because at the time, I think people who are creative tend to doubt their ability to lead. Because creative people are usually against authority. So you have this problem as a creative person. You're always like against authority. But now you're the authority. So it's like eating poison at the same time you're alive or something. And so what happens, generally speaking, is you tend to melt down because of it. I mean, you've experienced this, right? You're an engineer, designer, you're creative, you're making all kind of things, and like, 9 times out of 10, what'll happen when you're in a leadership position, you'll have someone who's a pure creative, who's not a creative leader, that's going to come up to you and ask you the same question. So, Diego, do you still design things? Who knows this question? Kurt, you've been asked this question, right? Yeah, so you still design things? Yeah? I have discovered there's a very simple answer to this. The answer is yes, because you have to tell them this, because this question is very simple. Because this question is basically asking, should I trust you or not? That's all that question really is. Should I trust you or not? And like, I'm not going to sit there and like, well, leading is kind of whatever. It's like design or whatever, whatever. I don't waste any time anymore. Like, yes, because actually I am. I'm sitting there designing something. I'm making something. Am I doing it all the time? No, I can't. Otherwise, I couldn't do all the alignment work I'm doing. And do I need credit for it? No, because that's my job. So I take it that way. Number 2, as a creative leader, I think having a lot of respect for execution is critical. Because creativity is not about execution. It's about divergence. And so I spend most of my time in ops and looking at how to optimize things and having conversations with operations type people who will tend to code anyone with a design badge as ignorant, right? Like, you've got like a lot of stuff in you, but they're still going to think you're a designer. Like, no, you went to HBS. No, you're still a designer. You know what I mean? You know what I mean, right? Wink, wink. Like, you don't really know what you're talking about. And so that game is always going to be lost. So it's important to kind of like be curious and understand and partner, and to keep remembering that design is a really irrelevant field in a company. It's a service field. It's not meant to like, be there on the Olympic stand. It doesn't have to be on the stand with a medal. It's a great supporting actress. It's an essential piece. Think about, I didn't realize it, but think about a movie with no supporting characters, right? not a really interesting movie. So I think of it that way. I think of myself, my job, or design's job, is to be a great supporting character. Well, first of all, I find distributed work really great for developers because, you know, that world is right there. So it's not different from the world that they're going to work in. I think for designers, this computer world thing is not great. That said, being in a work environment that isn't inspiring isn't great too. So I resolved the inspiration problem in a fairly simple way, simplistic way, which is I like to expose everyone to the same material, same artistic influences. It sounds really simplistic, but it seems to be working. Monday is always art day. And on art day, I'm highlighting a different contemporary artist who's maybe alive or dead. And in doing so, I'm creating a cadence of creative culture that I believe is important. And in doing so, I'm producing a signal that's producing some commonality that I could have been able to create through controlling a lobby. But as you know, as you walk by the lobby, you're like, you don't notice it. But creating a common experience. And because it's always going to be multimedia, I take advantage of that. I can show video content. I can show animated content. You know, I can show type large, small. Like last week, it was Elizabeth Streb, the experimental dance expert, MacArthur-winning, amazing physical art person. Yesterday, it was Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was like the genius across all media types. And so it's like using art history as a cultural change mechanism. And to me, this is working. I tried many things to build this common culture thing, and this is sticking because I have it on my iPhone to-do list on like Sunday night. So creating the regularity as a leader is so hard because once you break the pattern, people know like, you just tried that and you gave up. So I've stuck to this like one of those Scottish terriers, you know. Well, I kind of come back to that. I don't know if I really achieved that. It's because in the 90s, when I was at the Media Lab, I had this kind of, you know, the great thing about like life is sometimes stuff makes more sense. And the narrative of the Media Lab, it was founded by a man named Nicholas Negroponte. But if you scratch away at the story, he's the co-founder. And the other co-founder is a man named Jerome Wiesner, who's no one knows about because he's dead. When people die, they go away. You know? Have you noticed this? Like someone you knew and like they're dead and like no one talks about them. Like someone famous you knew or like you respected, like they're dead and like, oh my gosh, you forgot. Well, of course, I don't know. So signal goes away. But Jerome Wiesner was a very large signal in his era. He was a science advisor to Lyndon B. Johnson, to John F. Kennedy. He was often in op-ed pieces in the New York Times, fighting for anti-nuclear matters in the world. And he was a co-founder of the Media Lab. He was MIT's most important president. And I met him when I was a sophomore at MIT. I remember I was walking into one of the elevators in the main lobby. It's like one of these old elevators that only fits like 3 people. And so like I get in there and this like old guy walks in and like he starts talking to me. Where do you live? I'm like, oh, like, this is a little spooky. And then like, you know, it's like someone's uncle or father or whatever. It's like, where do you live on campus? I live over there. Like starts asking questions and I'm like, oh, this is awkward. I'm very shy at that age too. So anyways, like he gets out and then like the next day I open the school newspaper and it's like this man is like John F. Kennedy. I'm like, wow, that's pretty important because my mom named me after JFK. So that's why I kind of remembered that encounter. Anyways, so when I discovered Jerome Wiesner and how he was the co-founder, he was the Yoda to Nicholas Negroponte's like Padawan, you know? It was when realizing that he worked on the Manhattan Project and as a young physicist, engineer. But when you dig deeper, the scientists who work on the Manhattan Project were greatly troubled after the bombs exploded over Japan. Why? Because here's this amazing thing of science. It's pure science, the impossible, but then, wait, these millions of people died. And yes, you can argue that millions of lives were saved by ending that conflict, but this thing we made now destroyed all these people. And of course, it's also helped people's lives today with like, you know, chemo, etc. So all this aside, I began realizing that many of the scientists of that era were affected by the Manhattan Project in ways that affected their conscience. You know, we mentioned chatbots. Dr. Joseph Weizenbaum. I had him as an instructor in my AI class. And I didn't know he was like really important. People said, Weizenbaum, like, I'd never heard of that person. But Dr. Joseph Weizenbaum is the person who invented ELIZA, which is the chatbot archetype. And I remember at MIT, people said, yeah, he's famous, but he's kind of like not into it anymore. He's not into computer science. And I didn't really understand what that meant. But as I dug away, you know, he was one of the people who created the Science, Technology, and Society programs. And it's because after he'd created ELIZA, he left the computer science field because he was troubled by this thing that could program, that could fake a conversation. And because he fled Nazi Germany as a child, he knows what happens when power takes control of large amounts of people. And he envisioned a day when computation could achieve that scale, and how dangerous could that be? So, long story short, these experiences made me question technology. And to this day, I still have it. So that's why I like to keep humanism in frame with technology. All right, we did it.
I was just thinking, so
let's see.
Must have been in the room with him in the White House, because wasn't he, Gardner was...
Oh, you're right, I never thought about that. That's really neat.
Connection in your...
Oh, I didn't think about that. Well, I went to the White House Fellows event one year, which was created by Gardner. Wow. And that was kind of like a wonderful kind of like bookend to having had that.